That's important because, especially when it comes to ministers of Jesus Christ, those serving in roles of spiritual leadership, uh, everybody in the church, let me rephrase that. Nobody in the church should ever think that, well, just because an elder, just because I'm a minister of Jesus Christ, that I'm somehow better than anybody else or have less sins. Sin is sin, and everybody sins, regardless of color or station or role in life. And so, God's servants are willing to expose their own human frailty. We also discussed briefly how God, He always promises to deliver us through danger, through trials, but He never promises us freedom from trials. And we'll see that again tonight towards the end of the chapter, and that will also prompt some of our discussion after the Bible study. Since King Agrippa was familiar with the different scriptures, Paul built on that foundation and he drew from their common beliefs. Now, one of the accusations of the Jews against Paul is they said, well, Paul, he's trying to start this new religion. But King Agrippa was familiar with Judaism. And so Paul built on that familiar knowledge base and he emphasized how this Jesus Christ, this guy that he was preaching, that was actually the Messiah who had been prophesied about throughout the entire Old Testament. We also looked at that very powerful Greek word, egeiro, Egeiro. And we saw how God raises people from the dead easily. It's just like he's waking them up from sleep. It's not a problem for God. And this concept of death, or this view of death, it was a Jewish understanding that went back long before even the prophet Daniel's time. And so Paul pointed out to King Agrippa that ultimately it's an unwillingness to believe God, or to believe that God can and will do what he says he'll do, which is the true barrier to a person's faith. It's not a gap of or a gap in logical thinking. Then at the end of the chapter, King Agrippa, he admitted to Festus, who was already of that opinion. He said, well, Paul, he likely would have been set free if he hadn't appealed to Caesar. Uh, so that was unfortunate, of course. Uh, Paul would have probably wanted to have been set free, but it's clear that God had an important plan and an important work to be done through Paul, that he was going to do through Paul. So tonight we're going to go through Acts 27. We might go a couple minutes over time, but really would like to just finish the whole chapter. So we'll go through all 44 verses. And basically, chapter 27 can be broken down into four parts. So, verse 1 through 13, we have Paul's departure. Verse 1 through 13, verse 14 through 20, we have disaster. So, third section is verse 21 through 38, and we have leadership. And then finally, verse 39 to 44, we have got deliverance. So that was 1 to 13, 14 to 20, 21 to 38, and 39 to 44. And I'll try to remind you again of this, but the time setting is right around the years 59 to 62 AD. And we may not be able to exactly pinpoint the year, but we know based on the certain leading emperors and other individuals that it has to be within that span of time. So if you have your Bible, we'll go over to Acts and begin in chapter 27. So Acts 27, and as soon as I get my page straightened out here, Acts 27 and verse 1. And when it was decided that we should sail to Italy, they delivered Paul and some other prisoners to one named Julius, a centurion of the Augustan regiment. So let's see here. That is not the right one. What is that? Oh, that's supposed to come next. Let's try this one. This is the third of three quote unquote we sections that we have in the book of Acts. It seems to be now just Paul and Luke. And the reason I say that is because Paul was imprisoned. Now, he had friends visiting him, but he was imprisoned. And at this point in time, right here at the very beginning of chapter 27, we don't have anybody else mentioned. Now, we will have someone else mentioned here shortly, but so far it's just Paul and Luke saying we, so it's just those two. Uh, we've got a map here I'll show you, and maybe I'll just read that real fast. We've gone through this before, so I won't rehearse it now, but the we sections in the book of Acts are chapter 16, verse 10 through 18, chapter 20, verse 4 through 21, verse 19, and 27, chapter 27, and chapter 28 through 30. And again, we've covered this before in other Bible studies, so I'll refer you to one of those. Now, the last we section that we covered, we had Paul, Silas, Timothy, Luke, along with 6 others. So 10 people that were in Paul's traveling party. Now we just have Paul and Luke plus this other man to come. I'll show you a map real quick here. We've got Paul traveling from Caesarea Maritima, where he was imprisoned at Herod's fortress, over to Sidon, all the way up to Myra, over to Salome. Well, he didn't actually stop there, but all the way over to this island of, excuse me, Crete, and then over to Malta, to Sicily, and up to Rome. So he's going on this long journey. Now, if Paul were to go directly to Rome from Caesarea, barring any problems, let's just say he was going on this boat journey and everything would go according to plan without any issues. Multiple commentaries say that would have been roughly a 24-day journey and about 1,810 miles. Now that is with no problems. So the better part of a month. Could take a little bit longer in some cases. This Augustan regiment, King James Version, Authorized Version says band, Augustan band. Now remember, a regiment of soldiers is between 400 to 600 men. Now, Albert Barnes says that this was called Augustus's regiment in honor of the Roman emperor, and it was probably distinguished in some way for the care in enlisting or selecting them. So they would have been just very high quality soldiers. And so this centurion here wouldn't have been just run of the mill. This was somebody who would have had a lot of experience and would have been highly qualified in a number of different departments. Albert Barnes goes on to cite mentions of this particular regiment, the Augustan regiment, from other extra biblical works of literature. So it's not just in the Bible. They were so famous and renowned in the first century that other people knew of them and wrote about them in Greek literature. Verse 2. So entering a ship of Adramyttium, we put to sea, meaning to sail along the coasts of Asia. Aristarchus, a Macedonian of Thessalonica, was with us. So we have Adramyttium. And Adramyttium, if you're looking at this map here that's on my screen, and it appears that did my picture fill up the entire map? That is not what's supposed to happen. Let's try something. That's not going to work. We'll use a different map. Okay, pay no attention to this line here. But if you look up here, here's Ephesus over on the east side of the Aegean Sea. And then just north of there, you've got this town here that we referred to, Adramyttium. up here at the northeast side of the Aegean Sea, Adramyttium. And it was this maritime town that was situated here between Ephesus and Troas. And Paul's ship that he just got on, it was built there. Later in chapter 27, we're going to see that it seems to have been a grain vessel. We have as well Aristarchus mentioned here, and we've talked about him before. He was Paul's traveling companion on several different trips. We see him a couple times in the book of Acts, Acts 19, verse 29, Acts 20, verse 4. We also see Aristarchus mentioned in Philemon 1:24, Colossians 4:10. Again, not going into that in depth because we covered it last time or the time before. But I do want to read you something from William Barclay's commentary. And he notes this about the devotion of Aristarchus. He says, it has been suggested there was only one way in which Aristarchus could have accompanied Paul on this last journey, and that would have been by enrolling himself as Paul's slave. It is probable Aristarchus chose to take this action rather than be separated from him, and loyalty can go no further than that. So again, that's postulation. We don't know for sure. But there is that idea out there, that theory out there. John Gill's commentary says Aristarchus instead became a prisoner, and that's why he joined Paul. If you have your a marker for your Bible, just hold your place for a minute, and we'll go over to the book of Colossians. Colossians chapter 4, verse 10. We have Paul referencing here at the end of this epistle, and he says, after listing all these individuals, mentioning Aristarchus, at the beginning, verse 10, he says, Aristarchus, my fellow prisoner, greets you. And then he lists some other individuals here. Adam Clarke's commentary, Mr. Clarke says Aristarchus was simply Paul's companion, and he emphatically states that Aristarchus was not a prisoner at this time, and he couldn't have been. That's very emphatic, but he doesn't offer any support for his position. So we don't know exactly when Aristarchus became a prisoner. All we know is that eventually he did become a prisoner, for whatever reason that would have been. Now, we'll read going back to Acts, verse 3. The next day we landed at Sidon. Julius treated Paul kindly, gave him liberty to go to his friends and receive care. Now, Holman's Study Bible says that there were apparently Christians in Sidon, and although Acts doesn't record when the city was evangelized, it may have arisen from the Jews traveling to Jerusalem at Pentecost, and that's from Acts 2, verse 9, or from Christians fleeing the persecution taking place in Jerusalem from Acts 11, verse 19. And Mr. Holman, he says, well, Paul had friends there, possibly from an unrecorded visit to Jerusalem. So again, not really sure, but those are some ideas. And it says here, he gave him liberty. So Julius gave Paul liberty. And that word in Greek is epitrepo. And epitrepo means, it's pretty fascinating, actually. Digging into this, I spent maybe more time than I should have looking at this. But epitrepo means to turn over or to leave the entire trust or management of somebody. To turn over to or leave to the entire trust or management of someone. So if I was saying, well, here's the keys to my car, I am epitrepoing it to Ken Scorseth. I know he is trustworthy. I would be saying, I'm turning over control of these keys. I'm leaving the situation. I'm not going to know what's going on. I have complete faith and trust in this individual. And so the focus of the Greek word here, when it says gave him liberty, the focus of the Greek word is not so much on Julius granting Paul permission, but the focus is on the level of trust that this battle-hardened, experienced, skilled, intelligent, leading Roman centurion of this elite group of soldiers conferred upon a prisoner. In other words, this word epitrepo, it means that nothing was withheld from Paul. Julius didn't say, well, here you go, I give you liberty, but no strings attached. So pretty incredible if you think about it. And I'd like to just, you don't have to turn there. I've got it on the screen, but Proverbs 16, verse 7, you could reference. And New English translation says, when a person's ways are pleasing to the eternal, he even reconciles his enemies to himself. New Living Translation says, when people's lives please the eternal, even their enemies are at peace with them. And that is certainly the case here with Paul. God blessed his efforts abundantly. Now, we have the word here, or the phrase rather, at the end of the verse 3, where it says, Julius granted him liberty to receive care, to go to his friends and receive care. Authorized King James says, refresh himself. And that word in Greek is epimeleia. Epimeleia. And epimeleia is, well, epimeleia is a noun, and it is the noun form of the root word epimele. And Eliot's commentary for English readers says that the Greek wording suggests the idea of provision for personal comforts, like clothing, for the voyage. Now, after 2 years of imprisonment, we may well believe such kindly care would be both necessary and acceptable. I'd like you to join me back in the book of Luke, because we see where this word is also used. Back in Luke chapter 10, and maybe some of you are familiar already where I'm going, but Luke 10, verse 34 and 35. Luke 10, 34 and 35, we have this parable, Jesus Christ speaking. And probably one of the most, if not the most, familiar parable in the Bible. And Luke 10, 34 and 35 is breaking into the middle of the parable of the Good Samaritan. And it says, he went to him, he bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine, set him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. 35, on the next day when he departed, he took out 2 denarii, so 2 days' wages, and he gave them to the innkeeper, said to him, take care of him. Whatever more you spend, when I come again, I will repay you. That word, same root word as it is in Acts. This is, instead of the noun though, this is the verb. So this is epimeliomai. So same root word, just the verb instead of the noun this time. It's the same word used in both 34 and 35, and it seems to imply or convey this sense of providing for bodily needs beyond, but certainly including, just basic clothing. Expositor's dictionary says that this word is used in the Septuagint version of the Old Testament, in Proverbs chapter 3, verse 8. It's also used in classical Greek writing. This word, epimelemai, is also used in works by early medical writers to convey the idea of care being bestowed upon the sick. And this is the way, maybe I have a simpler mind, but this is how I kind of understand it. Some of you may have watched those YouTube videos where it's this influencer and they go up and they find some homeless person in the city, right? And they're sitting there, they look disheveled, they're homeless, they look terrible, and they got shaggy beard and they just look a mess, covered in filth. And the YouTube personality will go take them in their car, bring them to a hotel, they'll get them showered, get their teeth brushed, pay for them to get their hair cut, beard trimmed or cut off. They'll feed them, take them out, get them fed, uh, get their maybe a nail, what's it called, manicure or pedicure, get their nails all fixed up, get the beard looking nice. If they have any wounds, they'll treat them, dress any of those wounds, buy them some nice clothes, a belt, some shoes. If they've got glasses that are taped, they'll replace it, etc. So this word here that Luke was inspired by God to use, he is implying that Paul is having all of his physical needs met in order that he might be refreshed. And so, even though Paul was able to have people visit him while being imprisoned, there's a big difference. I mean, many of you went to the feast. There's a big difference between sleeping in someone else's bed and your own bed. Now, picture it if you don't have a choice and you're kept imprisoned. Even if you have friends visiting you, that is not the same as good old fashioned home cooked meal, nice hospitality. So, Luke is the exclusive user of this word in the New Testament, with the exception of one use by Paul. We're going to look at that in 1 Timothy 3. 1 Timothy 3, this word here, epimelomai. Epimelomai, to care for, took care of. Let's see it in 1 Timothy 3 in verse 5. Here we have the qualifications for elders. And it says in verse 5, verse 4 says, rules his own house well, having his children in submission with all reverence. Verse 5, for if a man does not know how to rule his own house, how will he take care of the church of God? And so Paul's message to Timothy was just a couple years later than this experience in the book of Acts. He's probably thinking back to this. And what he's getting at is, if a man is unable to lead his family effectively, if he's unable to manage his family effectively, if he can't care for and provide for his wife and his children, and he can't do that properly, it is unlikely at best that he would be able to oversee and care for the spiritual needs of members of the household of God. So pretty strong language, not harsh, but strong wording that Luke was inspired to use and that Paul was inspired to use in his letter to Timothy as well. Verse 4 to 6. When we had put to sea, from there we sailed under the shelter of Cyprus. I think I said Crete earlier, but I meant Cyprus. Because the winds were contrary. When we had sailed over the sea, which is off Cilicia and Pamphylia, we came to Myria, a city of Lycia. Okay, I'm wrong. I did mean Crete earlier. Here it's Cyprus. We'll see a map later. We came to Myra, a city of Lycia. Verse 6, there the centurion found an Alexandrian ship sailing to Italy, and he put us on board. The ship Paul's party was on was not intended. It was never intended to go all the way to Italy, and the party changed boats. Holman Study Bible said that this ship would have taken them, this particular ship they had been on, it would have taken them way out of the way since it was going to be following the coast of the province of Asia. And so as a result, at Myra, the centurion found a ship from Alexandria that was going to Rome, and that would have been part of the grain supply trade route from Egypt to Rome. And because my map is busted, let's see if my other map comes up here. Or if my other map has the things on it that I want it to have. So Sidon, over here north of Caesarea Maritima. Sidon, oh yeah, this is perfect because this shows Paul's journey. So Sidon here, north of Tyre, over to Myra up here. That's about 500 miles, course dependent, but about 500 miles by boat, roughly 9 days with favorable conditions. And that's according to a Greek writer named Lucian. And it could take, if conditions were bad, double the time. So 15, 18 days if things were not good. So verse 7 and 8 now. When we had sailed slowly, many days, and arrived with difficulty off Cnidus, the wind not permitting us to proceed, we sailed under the shelter of Crete off Salmone. Passing it with difficulty, we came to a place called Fair Havens, near the city of Lasea. Let me bring my map back up here. And that's over here on the east side of Crete. So you have Salmone, which you just said they passed by it, so they didn't stop there, but they came around over here by Fair Havens. Myra to Cnidus, 175 miles. Would take around 1 day to do that distance, as long as there were favorable conditions. And that's according to BereanInsights.org. They say it could take up to 25 days just to do this short trip here from Myra over to Crete, just to the Cnidus, or I think it's pronounced Cnidus. If there were strong headwinds, if there were rough seas. And then from Cnidus just to the south side of the island to Fair Havens, it's just 12 miles. That should have just been a couple-hour trip. So just a super fast little hop, skip, and a jump, as we sometimes say, is all it should have taken. But bad conditions hindered them. And what we notice is even a well-planned trip can take longer than expected, given the unpredictability of the weather. And so it would have behooved the sailors to take into account a number of different factors. We're going to see that pretty powerfully here in just a moment. Verse 9 and 10. When much time had been spent, and sailing was now dangerous because the fast was already over, Paul advised them, saying, Men, I perceive this voyage will end with disaster and much loss, not only of the cargo and ship, but also our lives. So this was probably in mid-October. Again, we're not told exactly how long after the fast this was, but it was after the fast. So Feast of Atonement, late September. This was probably middle of October now. Commentaries suggest this was probably AD 59, because in that year the Day of Atonement was much later, which may have contributed to the poor weather patterns. Again, we can't pinpoint it exactly, but that's probable. My New International Version Archaeological Study Bible says the Romans considered the prospect of sailing after the 15th of September doubtful. They considered sailing after November 11th suicidal. So these verses really contain a powerful spiritual principle for us. And let's see, we can go over to Proverbs 27 just for a quick moment here. Proverbs 27 and verse 12. Proverbs 27, verse 12, it says, A prudent man foresees evil and hides himself. The simple pass on and are punished. We also have a reference back to Proverbs 22 and verse 3, and it says, A prudent man foresees evil and hides himself, but the simple pass on and are punished. So kind of the same thing, Proverbs 22 and verse 3, Proverbs 27 verse 12. But the idea is when making activity plans or life plans, a wise Christian does well to take things into account. Things like the weather, things like, well, do I have enough money saved up, or do I have to put this on a credit card? Things like, needs of other people. Well, I want to drive straight, but I know my children are going to need to stop. So I need to factor that in. It's going to take longer. Uh, I know I can drive straight, but my wife does not want to be stuck in the car for 20 hours without ever stopping. I need to take into account some of those things. Uh, Distance of travel, other different things like that. Uh, Maybe a timely thing for us, many of us have just returned from observing the feast. Some of us did not go to the feast this year and we weren't able to. But some of us didn't go to the feast this year and we were able to. That's not okay. That is sinning. We need to take steps to not do that next year. And so now is the time, right after the feast, to say, is there something I would do differently next year? I'm going to start making preparations now. Um, because a wise Christian takes into account the experiences from the previous year and makes necessary changes. Um, did you? Maybe none of you did, but I know some people in Rapid City did. Waited until a week before the feast to make hotel reservations. Some people waited until a day or two before. Uh, that's not wise. Uh, did you prepare a holy day offering months in advance or during the service as they were giving the offertory message? That's not a wise thing to do. And so, as a Christian, we can foresee some of these things coming in the future, and we can say, well, I know that's coming. How can I plan for it today so that it just goes very easily and smoothly when that time comes? And so, uh, some of these things that Paul's crew, not Paul's crew, but the crew on the ship Paul was on, were dealing with, they could have been foreseen. I mean, they knew what was going to happen. They could have made some different decisions. They are going to choose not to do that. And we're going to see why. Verse 11 through 13. Nevertheless, the centurion was more persuaded by the helmsman and the owner of the ship than by the things spoken by Paul. And because the harbor was not suitable to winter in, the majority advised to set sail from there also, if by any means they could reach Phoenix, a harbor of Crete opening towards the southwest and northwest, and winter there. When the south wind blew softly, supposing they had obtained their desire, putting out to sea, they sailed close by Crete. This word in Greek for persuaded is peitho, 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 and uh, peitho, really, peitho, because you pronounce the I in the middle of a Greek word in Koine Greek like the I in intrigue, so it's peitho. Anyway, peitho means is what they translated persuaded here, and it means endeavor to convince, to influence by persuasion, to aspire to the favor of, to pacify, to win over. And Thomas Nelson's study Bible says it could just be that the owner of the ship wanted to get his grain to a larger port so he could sell it. Julius probably wanted a better place to winter his men. Thomas Nelson's study Bible says, in other words, greed and desire for comfort seems to have gotten in the way of good sense. The owner may also, this is my conjecture, the owner may have offered the helmsman a bonus if he was willing or able to complete his trip. Many of you have seen Smokey and the Bandit or other shows like that. Oh, we can't get this thing to move. Well, what do you think about $10,000? Could that get this ship rolling? Oh, it could. Okay. Sometimes people have money to burn and it gets things going. Um, Possible. Can't say for 100% certain, but 100% surety. But the Greek word does lend to that. And so maybe a couple lessons we can draw from this is number one, the majority vote does not guarantee truth. We've seen that time and time again in the church. Just because everybody wants to do something or thinks something, that doesn't make it right. We see that on a greater scale with humanity. Just because everybody's doing it doesn't mean it's a good idea. Uh, the second takeaway we could glean from this is that common sense can sometimes be blinded by money and by scheduling pressures. Well, I know this isn't a good idea, but boy, I've really got to do such and such. I just don't have enough time. Oh, well, sometimes it doesn't work well. Verse 14 through 16. Not long after, a tempestuous headwind arose, called Euroclydon. So when the ship was caught and could not head into the wind, we let her drive. And running under the shelter of an island called Clauda, we secured the skiff with difficulty. So this word here, Euroclydon in Greek, some translations render it uh, Eurocylon. Uh, doesn't necessarily matter. One's not necessarily more correct than the other. The Greek is Eurocylon with a kappa. And the name, this literally means the name of, or it is the name of a tempestuous southeast wind. This word Eurykalon is a combination of two Greek words, euros, E-U-R-O-S, and it means wide. The other word is kludon, K-L-U-D-O-N, kludon, and it means a raging or a surging wave. And so Eurykalon or Euroclydon, or however you want to pronounce or render it, effectively refers to the sea being stirred up into such a tumultuous state by a wind that is not blowing steadily from any one direction. In other words, this is a strong and violent hurricane. Now, New King James Version says a tempestuous headwind arose. King James Version, in this particular instance, the authorized King James, is a better translation because the Greek does not say a tempestuous headwind arose. King James says there arose against it, against the ship, against it, a tempestuous wind. We'll go through a few Greek words here because it's important that we capture what this is saying and what it isn't saying. It's not just saying it's a blustery day and it's kind of tough to sail. That is not at all the case. So this word in Greek for arose is ballo, B-A-L-L-O, and it means to strike or throw violently or intensely. The word in New King James for headwind is anemos, and it means, let's see, New King James doesn't say there was a wind against it like the King James does. That is a better rendering because Luke is not writing about this headwind. He's writing about this hurricane bashing the ship violently and throwing it around. And so anemos refers to winds in general coming from any direction, as opposed to winds coming specifically from one direction, like a nor'easter or something, wind coming just from one way. And so this word anemos, not only used here, it's also used in the book of Ephesians. Paul referenced it, and it's very likely, based on what we know about Paul, based on what we know about his journeys, he wrote the letter to the church in Ephesus right after this, while he was in prison. So if this was 59 AD, he wrote the letter to the Ephesians in 60 AD. So right after this happened. And that is incredibly significant. And the reason why we can see over in Ephesians 4, verse 14, because he's probably thinking back to this terrible experience when he uses this word for wind, anemos. Ephesians 4, verse 14. Before this, he's going through the organizational structure in the Church of God, and he's talking about how God is not the author of confusion, but instead it says, Jesus Christ, he himself, he gave some to be apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers for this purpose of edifying the saints, and so that we can come to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ. I mean, that's why you're doing everything you do. But verse 14, Paul says, you're doing that. And because you're doing all that, he says, we should no longer be children, spiritual babes, tossed to and fro, carried about with every animus of doctrine. Every wind of doctrine, by the trickery of men, in the cunning craftiness of deceitful plotting, but speaking the truth in love. And so there is truth, there is error. And the idea Paul is getting at is sound doctrine is reliable, it's constant. Once the truth is discovered, we need to do what we know we're supposed to do. If I know I'm supposed to keep the Sabbath, I'll keep the Sabbath. That's it. That's all there is for it. If I know I'm supposed to assemble, have a holy convocation, I assemble if I am physically able to do that. If I'm able to go to the feast, keep the holy days, I do those things. Constant consistency. We cling to those things. We are not to be wishy-washy or uncertain or looking for a variety of teachers speaking different things and being plugged in all over the board. To use an analogy of a plant, you grow where you're planted, and you serve the people that are in the congregation you're in. There was a guy, I'm getting off track of my notes, but there was a guy in one congregation I attended, and he used to pride himself on how friendly he was. And he's, I go to all these different congregations, every different Church of God groups every week of the month. So one week I'm in Cagua, one week I'm in Living, one week I'm in United, the other week I'm in this other home fellowship, and so he'd jump around. And one day he got offended about something, not knowing something was going on. And the pastor, it wasn't me, the pastor told him, you're just a visitor here. You may claim to be a member of United Church of God. You may claim this as your home congregation, but you're only here once or twice a month. You're a visitor. The members of our group are people who are here and consistently serving their brethren. It's like if I was a father and I only came home once a month. Well, I'm not much of a dad, am I, to my kids if I do that? The idea is the same here. Um, Getting back to what Paul was saying in his letter to the church in Ephesus, if Jesus, if Matthew, if Mark, if Luke, if Paul, if Peter all taught something, and those same teachings are being taught by faithful ministers, we're to cling to those teachings. We're not to follow blindly. That's not using wisdom. We test all things. We hold back that which is true. We're like the Bereans. We prove all things, but we cling to those teachings once we prove them for ourselves. We don't get blown about by alternative ideas. We don't get off track by these different groups that make something other than the church. I'm sorry, other than the gospel message of Jesus Christ, their center of their gospel message. I mean, Jesus Christ is coming back. He's setting up a kingdom of God. That's what it's about. We can't be focused on, some sort of secret rapture. Some Church of God groups teach that. Well, Christ is going to come near the earth. Believers are going to go into heaven. They'll just sit there and hang out with him for a few months. Well, that's not in the Bible, but it's also secondary. Don't make that your central focus. Oh, wow, well, the flat earth, that's going to be our folk. Or, we've got to use these sacred names, or we've got to do this other. Don't do that. Focus on the gospel of the kingdom of God and human beings, the mystery of human beings being able to be born into the very family of God, taking on the name of God. That is the central theme of the gospel message. That's what it's all about. We are not to be blown off course. And that's what Paul is getting at in his letter to the church in Ephesus. And if we go back to the book of Acts and we look at that word that was used for tempestuous, it's the Greek word typhonikos. typhonikos, and it means hurricane or typhoon or whirlwind. So pretty easy to understand where that comes from. Acts 27, verse 17. When they had taken it on board, the skiff, they used cables to undergird the ship. And fearing lest they should run aground on the Syrtis sands, they struck sail and so were driven. Syrtis sands, my archaeological study Bible says that Syrtis was this long stretch of desolate banks of quicksand along northern Africa off the coast of Tunis and Tripoli. That was still far away, but in a storm like this, though the ship could easily have been driven a great distance. And so the sea anchor was apparently lowered to keep the ship from running onto the sandbars of Syrtis. Alternatively, the Greek translated sea anchor may be also rendered as mainsail. That's from Archaeological Study Bible. Now, one moment here. This word here in Greek for cables is boetheia. Boetheia. And if you don't remember a single other Greek word from this entire study, this is the one to write down. Boethia. That's what it is. Boethia. Boethia. Boetheia. Boethia. This is the word you want to remember. Write it in big letters. You'll want to meditate on this later. And this word is a word that is specifically used in Koine Greek in reference to a rope or a chain, which is used to undergird a vessel. Now, undergirding a vessel in modern parlance is also called frapping, F-R-A-P-P-I-N-G. Undergirding, frapping, and the purpose would be to reinforce a ship's structure to prevent it from being torn apart board by board by waves and stress. Stress from all the waves hitting against it violently. And the method would be that they would, these seamen, they would pass these ropes under the ship's keel. So they'd be up in the front of the boat on the deck, and they'd drop this rope down over the front and try to get it to go under the ship. And it would go under the keel, which is the bottom, like a bar underneath, not a bar, but a thick extended section under the bottom of the ship. The hull is the outside of the ship, and then the keel is on the bottom. And these undergirdings, these frappings, these cables, these helps in King James, boethia, they would be under the ship's keel. They'd be fastened tight to the deck, and sometimes they'd be wrapped multiple times around the hull to act like this strong external brace. Boethia is used 2 times in Scripture. It's used here, and it is used in the book of Hebrews. And it's over in Hebrews 4, verse 16. And you don't have to turn there because I'm going to put it up on the screen. And I'm going to put it in a couple different translations here for us to read from. So Boethia, Moffat translation says, so let us approach the throne of grace with confidence that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in the hour of need. Pretty good translation. Moffat's not usually not the best translation anyway. But this is a good rendering of this verse. Another translation is the one we find in the Good News Bible. Also, not one that has a lot of high confidence in terms of just general doctrine, but the way it puts it in English, our vernacular, modern vernacular, it makes it very plain. And so I like these translations for this particular verse. Good News Bible says, let us have confidence then as we approach God's throne where there is grace. There we will receive mercy and find grace to help us just when we need it. And so Paul, or the author of Hebrews, acknowledges that there will be times when you as a Christian trip. There are going to be times when I slip up, when I make mistakes in my Christian walk. There are going to be times when I feel the heavy, uh, uh, burdensome weight of sin and the consequences of my sinful decisions, and they are just weighing heavily on my heart and on my mind. And I feel like I can't come back from that. There are going to be times when we feel like I can't do anything else. I'm not worthy to live. I should just die. And by our own power and strength, we cannot come back from that. But the imagery contained in this word boethia, it conveys the message that God can and God will undergird us when we come boldly before his throne. He will undergird us when we come humbly before his throne and we ask for help. Uh, Come with me over to First John 1, verse 9. First John 1, verse 9. Because this word, um, First John 1, verse 9. Because the word in Hebrew where Paul uses it there, he's not saying God will prop you up and make you feel better when you go through trials in life. That is not what he's saying. He's saying when you are weighted down and you're about to drown because of the guilt of your sin, God will rescue you. He will save you. First John 1, verse 9 says, if we confess our sins, he is faithful and just to forgive us our sins and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. All of it. And I've heard some people after baptism say, well, I'm not sure if God can forgive me. Well, you should be sure. That's what that hope is. It means that God is the undergirdment. He can uh when we feel like we want to give up because of the weight of our sins that we are totally guilty for, but we have confessed them and acknowledge our, as Gary Petty says, our absolute spiritual poverty before God in those times of heavy guilt. God promises to wrap his loving arms around us, to forgive us, to comfort us, to deliver us from being torn apart by the destructive waves and stress of sin. That is that's what the author of Hebrews was saying. That is what Jesus Christ was alluding to in Matthew 11, verse 28. When he said, come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, I will give you rest. That's the type of rest you can have in Jesus Christ's atoning sacrifice. Back in Acts 18, verse 20. Oh, that's not Acts. Acts 27, verse 18 through 20. Because we were exceedingly tempest tossed, the next day they lightened the ship. On the third day, we threw the ship's tackle overboard with our own hands, and when neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small tempest beat on us, all hope that we would be saved was finally given up. Just looking at something here, I'm not going to draw out that lesson right now for the sake of time. Archaeological Study Bible says this would have been the ship's tackle would have been spars, planks, perhaps the yardarm, the mainsail attached to it, often would have been dragged behind a ship in distress, which would serve as a brake. Verse 21 to 26. But after long abstinence from food, Paul stood in the midst of them and said, men, you should have listened to me and not have sailed from Crete and incurred this disaster and loss. And now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For there stood by me this night an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I serve, saying, do not be afraid, Paul. You must be brought before Caesar. And indeed, God has granted you all those who sail with you. Therefore, take heart, men, for I believe God that it will be just as it was told me. However, we must run aground on a certain island. And so Paul doesn't come right out and just say, I told you so, but he does offer a warning, right? What he does here is he's pointing out how part of what he already prophesied has come true. Loss of cargo, loss of the ship. Now the captain and crew have an opportunity to receive God's mercy and be delivered from death if they're willing to yield. And verse 24, we see it says, God has granted you all those you sail with to Paul. And by Paul sharing that, he's gently asserting his authority as a representative of God and Jesus Christ. Verse 27 to 29 says, when the 14th night had come, as we were driven up and down the Adriatic Sea, about midnight the sailors sensed they were drawing near land. They took soundings, found it to be 20 fathoms. A little further, it says 15 fathoms. Verse 29, fearing we should run aground, it says they dropped 4 anchors and prayed for day to come. So I do want to bring up this map one more time here. You have up in the top left-hand side on your screen, you see the Adriatic Sea. That is multiple commentaries bring out the fact that this is not the Adriatic Sea of the first century. Instead, the Adriatic Sea would be down here where this big arrow is, if you're looking on the screen, in the greater Mediterranean area. Let's see, today, this area where this big arrow is known as the Ionian Sea, and that is where Paul and his companions would have been. So right in this area here. So small point, but fairly important. It says they took soundings here, and what we have is use of something referred to as a lead line. These are depth soundings. So they have this rope with different markers attached to it. It's a piece of, where's my finger here? Pointing. All right, here's a piece of lead, obviously bigger than that, attached to it. They drop it down until it stops going down, and then they know how heavy it is. Commentaries bring out that a ship of this size, not uncommon to have many anchors, sometimes 6 or more anchors, because they would anchor it from all different directions if they were at a harbor or something like that. Verse 30 to 32 says the soldiers cut away the ropes of the skiff and they let it fall down. As day was about to, whoa, that's starting at 32. That's backwards. Let's try that again. Verse 30. As the sailors were seeking to escape the ship, when they had let down the skiff into the sea under pretense of putting out anchors from the prow, Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved. So the soldiers cut away the ropes of the skiff and let it fall away. And so this would have taken some great courage on behalf of the sailors. I mean, they knew what to do. They were sailors, right? Here's this guy who is just a prisoner. The takeaway from this, after they recognize Paul's authority as a representative of God, the takeaway for you and I is that grace and obedience, they go hand in hand. The sailors were not saved because they did what they were told. They were saved because they obeyed the instructions of someone representing God and Jesus Christ. And he was telling them to do something that was verifiably true based on those prophecies they had just witnessed. And in a sense, they were yielding their authority to God. And so the idea is trust but verify, and grace and obedience goes hand in hand. God will save us, not by anything we can do, but if we don't want to be there, we'll show it by our actions, and he's not going to force us to be where we don't want to be. So just a small takeaway lesson. Verse 33 to 37. And as the day was about to dawn, Paul implored them all to take food, saying, today is the 14th day you've waited and continued without food and eaten nothing. Therefore I urge you, take nourishment, for this is for your survival, since not a hair will fall from the head of any of you. When he said these things, he took bread and gave thanks to God in the presence of them all. When he had broken it, he began to eat. Then they were all encouraged, and they all took and also took food themselves. Verse 37, and in all we were 276 persons on the ship. So even in the first century, passenger lists were very common. This is what is referred to as a ship's manifest. So manifest is the list of passengers on a ship. Uh, Luke presumably would have been able to have access to that as a doctor, as a physician. Archaeological Study Bible says maybe they even needed to know how many people were there, and so they could get food prepared. So 276 was not extraordinary for the time. Josephus refers to a ship that had more than 600 people on board. So 276 is comparatively small potatoes. Verse 38 to 40. So when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship and threw out the wheat into the sea. When it was day, they didn't recognize the land, but they observed a bay with a beach, onto which they planned to run the ship if possible. They let go the anchors and left them in the sea, meanwhile loosing the rudder ropes, and they hoisted the mainsail and to the wind and made for shore. So if you jump ahead to verse 1 of chapter 28, it says they found out the island was called Malta. So here they didn't know yet that this was Malta. Here's a picture that I found in Holman's what? Holman's something dictionary. Holman's Illustrated Atlas. That's what it is. And so this is a picture of the coast of Malta. This is not what it looked like on that fateful evening when Paul and his crew crashed into the shoal there. But Malta was part of the Roman province of Sicily, and it was located about 60 miles south of Sicily near the toe of Italy. And I'll just put one last time up here this picture. So Sicily, just near the boot, and at the bottom of Sicily, down here where these arrows meet, is Malta. So about 60 miles off the coast of Sicily. Now, having eaten what they could, knowing they couldn't save the cargo, they threw the wheat overboard, and they hoped this final reduction in weight would cause the ship to sit higher and to take on less water. Verse 41 to 43. But striking a place where two seas met, they ran the ship aground, and the prow stuck fast and remained immovable. But the stern was being broken up by the violence of the waves, and the soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners, lest any of them should swim away and escape. But the centurion, wanting to save Paul, kept them from their purpose, and commanded that those who could swim should jump overboard first and get to land. And I think, it's supposed to be to verse 44. And the rest, some on board, some on parts of the ship. And so it was that they all, notice that, all escaped safely to land. Remember Paul's statement, not a hair on your head will be lost. Archaeological Study Bible says if a prisoner escaped and the life of his guard was to be taken in his place. So the soldiers did not want to risk having this happen. This was Roman law. This is something that is corroborated by many other commentaries. And what we see here is the wise, decisive act of the centurion acting on what he had proven to be true, seeing that fulfilled prophecy. It ensured everyone else's survival. And so we see God working through human beings to accomplish his will. And things worked out just like God had informed Paul through the angel. So that is the end of Acts 27. Appreciate you sticking around for the extra